Hello, and welcome to the History of Japan podcast, where I am truly terrible at estimating how long anything will take. Longtime listeners will know that I have a terrible habit of saying that a given project will take X number of episodes and then immediately overshooting that because I'm terrible at estimating these things. And astonishingly, I have done this once again, this skill that I'm quite practiced at. I had figured we could get through the travelogue stuff I wanted to do in 2 episodes, and lo and behold, we were at the end of a second episode, verging on 40 minutes of recording, and I still had some stuff I didn't have time to get to. And so the wonderful and talented Demetria, in addition to being my excellent travel companion, has volunteered to do some creative re-editing to make this into 3 episodes, with this little sort of introductory piece serving to bring us back into our discussion of Kyoto, where this time I promise we'll be done. Next week is back to one regular episode, and then the week after that is episode 500. So here we go, folks. We're coming up on the big milestone. And so the last place that we spent some time while we were there was the great city of Kyoto. What stood out to you about Kyoto, Demetria?
Oh, goodness. Okay, well, you know what I liked best in Kyoto,
Please share with the class.
which I think was one of the first things we did, which
Mm-hmm.
is that we went and we saw a samurai movie being filmed.
We did. We went to the Toei Kyoto Studios Park, otherwise known as Toei Eigamura, which is in the western part of the city. And if you really like samurai movies, if perchance you are married to someone where some of your earliest dates were going to see samurai movies, not to name any specific names, it's a pretty cool place, particularly because uh, the park, which is owned by Toei Studios, that churns out all these Jidai Geki, both shows off a lot of their old sets and props, and also they still actively use it sometimes for filming. So you can run into things being filmed, which we did. I think you ran into an actor coming out of the bathroom, right?
Yes, actually, someone in the full, latex over the head to make the top knot, full outfit coming out of the bathroom, and then just walks back onto the part of the park that is still a working studio lot. It really is incredible. It is not a studio lot in the sense of what a lot of American studio lots are these days, which is basically just a big old green screen. It is a lot of really well built sets, full streets actually, that can be redecorated to look like they're different streets from different eras. Really excellent stagecraft. And I was a tech theater kid. I love the stagecraft. And there is a fun ninja show, which I actually do recommend going to. Some really great prop work and some really fun use of creative practical effects in that. Even though I don't speak a word of Japanese, I could still basically follow along with what the plot of that was.
Yeah, I mean, they do the thing where they speak in the fake old school Japanese that's just a shortened version of like honorifics, because actual classical Japanese is incomprehensible. So it's not the easiest thing to follow. During the stage show, I could understand maybe half of what was being said, if that. But you don't. It's a samurai thing. You don't really need that much. They're fighting each other. It's fun. And yeah, the stagecraft is awesome. The actors are clearly having a great time with it. It's pretty cool.
I am not a huge theme park fan, but if you are going to go to a theme park in Japan, it is really, really cool to wander around very, very well built sets, some of which were used in some classic TV shows and movies. And yeah, I thought that was great fun. I had a great time.
There's a few other things I want to highlight from our time when we were there. One of them is the thing we saw right before we were at Toei Eigamura, which is the Arashiyama bamboo forest and the neighboring Zen temple of Tenryuji. This is another one where you do have to pay an entrance fee to get into Tenryuji. It's this huge old Zen complex that once upon a time was, again, one of the most influential temples in the country. What'd you think of that whole zone?
So I would say for the bamboo forest, I really wanted to see one because it is just a type of forest that we do not really have much of in the United States. It is gorgeous. It is fascinating. Very touristy. Do not go there expecting a still and serene glade. Mostly, what you're going to be getting is a bunch of other tourists complaining there are too many tourists there.
Yeah, it's a very popular site for a reason. It's absolutely gorgeous, but it is not quiet or contemplative by any stretch of the imagination. Honestly, Toei Igamura was quieter in a lot of ways.
I think my favorite part of the bamboo forest actually was the garbage truck that was playing a cheerful but slightly threatening message about what will happen to you if you litter.
Yeah, it was honestly. I mean, good. Good on them for sending a strong message about taking care of public spaces. But I remember exactly what they said. But it was like a remarkably direct. You better not litter or else we will get you, which was pretty fun in its own way. Other things we did in Kyoto. Kyoto
we
Tower.
Didn't talk about the temple complex.
Oh yeah, Tenryuji. What'd you think of Tenryuji?
So I found it really fascinating. I think this was another one where the experience I was having going with Isaac and the experience that other tourists were having there were clearly very different, because Isaac, we were walking through this and he's explaining the entire history of the way this particular sect had special trading privileges and what that did to sort of the wealth and influence that congregated around this sect. And we had a really amazing conversation about the aesthetics of, I think what I said is, there isn't a giant fuck off Buddha statue here, but in the negative space of these very sparse, spare aesthetics, you can see there could be a Buddha statue here if they wanted to put one here. But everything about these aesthetics is with a very simple, clean lines, lots of white, is designed to remind you that the choice not to have that is itself a sign of wealth and taste.
Yeah, it's kind of if you think of like a modern minimalist thing where the minimalism itself really is a way of conveying wealth. It's very similar. Tenryuji is a Rinzai sect temple. Rinzai, for a very long time, was a very wealthy, influential sect. And you can see that in this massive temple complex, where a lot of the curation for English speakers, and really for Japanese speakers too, is very, enjoy this serene, contemplative space. And there's not a lot about, this is how this temple became wealthy enough to build this massive, carefully sculpted complex that is all about artfully appearing very minimalist and natural in a way that, if you know anything about aesthetics, reflects a lot of money. So it's interesting to kind of see that idea play out, but the temple does not do a good job, I think, of acknowledging that, probably because it's not the greatest look for a temple to be talking so openly about the ways in which the sect used to be very, very closely aligned with wealth and power.
So actually, that segues nicely into something else that we should talk about in Kyoto, which is that we got some really cool experiences seeing some Pure Land Buddhist temples, and those I think were more upfront about some of their famous historical figures who had visited, and at least some of their connection to wealth and power.
Yeah, so we went to swing by Higashi Honganji, which is right by Kyoto Station. Which is one of the two headquarters temples for the true Pure Land sect, and just happened to find that the park that the sect owns nearby, Shosein, was doing this like nighttime light festival, and so we swung by that, and it was one of the coolest things I think we did in the whole time we were there. Like, it truly remarkably beautiful.
Yes, they had opened up their tea house and were selling some food and drinks in the tea house, and you can drink in the tea house and learn about a lot of the figures who had drunk in this tea house before, including, I would say, Tsar Nicholas II, not the most auspicious of the visitors.
Yes, when he was still crown prince, when he visited Japan and was also nearly assassinated by a Japanese nationalist, he also visited the temple. And visited the grounds of this beautiful park. Shosein is gorgeous. We have not been there during the day, but I do think that the true Pure Land Buddhists did a better job kind of acknowledging the ways in which that, that space is designed to sort of almost market the sect, right? It's designed to be this kind of beautiful space for contemplation, but also to kind of show, oh, we Pure Land sect people, we have these kind of connections, and we have, it's a way of kind of showing, like, acknowledging the ways in which you're kind of showing off the wealth and power of the sect, and thus the success of it. Where the Zen people talked around that a little bit more in a way I found interesting.
Yeah, I thought that was really interesting. I also the sort of the purpose of the light show was a little bit like, I would say, the way my childhood church growing up had Greek festivals. Was just a way to raise some money and show people a good time, and a good cultural experience. And yeah, a lot of really friendly volunteers there who are happy to talk to us and have us wander through the garden.
And I think we found the Light Festival because we visited another nearby tourist attraction we had a somewhat different experience with, Kyoto Tower.
I would not recommend Kyoto Tower. It is, I would say, a moderately tall building, not even really an impressively tall building.
Yeah, it's only impressive in the cityscape because Kyoto has like height limitation zoning laws that a lot of other Japanese cities don't. The view is not that incredible. It's like, I mean, a ripoff by Japanese standards. I think the ticket was like 1,500 yen or something like that. And the only thing I really enjoyed about it was that a bunch of school groups were there at night too. And it was a real kind of cultural experience to see all these students being kind of shuffled around by teachers, all of whom looked like they were strongly regretting their life choices. Which
we forgot to mention, in Nara, we actually ran into a lot of school groups in Nara as well who were fascinated by Isaac's height and gigantic Americanness.
That's always fun. I think the kids in that case were from Nagano, which is a bit more rural. They were not used to seeing Western people and were very excited by our presence. And then I always like to kind of mess with kids in that case by waiting for an opportune moment to reveal that I understand what they're saying, and then just seeing what kind of reaction I could get. I did that a few times, and those kids in Nara were some of the cutest in their reaction. It was very adorable.
They were really sweet. There were some boys in the museum who were really excited to practice their English greetings with you.
Yes, that was very, very nice. But Kyoto Tower, if there's not a bunch of adorable students there, not worth it, I'd say. You can see many other things that are better to do with your time.
We went up the tower and went, ooh, what's that cool lit up garden over there? Let's go over there instead.
Yeah, that was definitely worth it. So in that sense, it worked out. A few other things I want to highlight, though, make sure we don't run too long. Fushimi Inari Shrine. We talked a lot about Inari Shrines last week. You got to see the big one, the OG Inari Shrine. What'd you think?
Yes, this was really cool. We didn't go all the way up to the top. It's a 3-mile hike? It's not
just
huge,
about, yeah.
But
it's not really hard, but it is, it's an investment of time.
Mm-hmm. And this is, of course, the one with the famous red gates. There are actually, as we said in the last episode, a lot of temples that do the red gate, like the multiple red gates in a row thing. So if your goal is to get aesthetic photos, do not do that at Fushimi Inari, because there are constantly going to be people walking through your shot. And we probably walked through the shots of about 10 people who were trying to get aesthetic photos, but we had to keep the line moving. There are a lot of other places if your goal is to take a bunch of photos, but if your goal is just to experience one of the most impressive shrine complexes I've ever seen, and a shrine that just kind of kept on going, like all the way up the mountain. There are sub shrines. Yes, I would say, Fushimi Inari, absolutely worth it.
And it's pretty convenient. There is a JR rail stop literally across the street from the entrance to the shrine, so it's not hard to get to. A little bit harder to get to was the Gekkeikan Sake Museum, the Okura Sake Museum, which we did right after Fushimi Inari, I believe. What'd you think?
I had a really delightful time in this one. This was obviously another one of those museums that was created by a company to be laudatory toward the company. So obviously, a bit of a slant there. But I found it really actually very friendly to English speaking tourists. And it really clearly lays out how sake is made, what about Gekkeikan, especially. We learned Gekkeikan was actually a much older company that rebranded during the Meiji era. And the laurel leaf thing is actually supposed to be kind of a neoclassical vibe. And the way that Gekkeikan became internationally distributed thanks to some innovations in sake bottling and preservation. And I actually found it a really interesting history of a company that hit a really, really interesting era of Japanese history and took full advantage of every opportunity that it had to expand during that era. I particularly love the extensive section about how excited they were to build this Western style neoclassical building.
Yeah, it's really interesting. The man who basically reinvents Gekkeikan from the Ogura family, that's where the name comes from. Um, I can't remember what his name was, but he was this basically like classic Meiji guy who really loved Western science and technology and was all about scientific sake brewing. And that's kind of what made Gekkeikan into this incredibly big brand, was that he was very invested in finding ways to use Western chemistry to make sake a little more shelf stable. So it was easier to like ship around and, have it just kind of on hand, and do like scientific tastings to try and adjust the flavor profiles. It's very interesting. Also, big shout out to the Australian guy at the end of the tour where they're handing out samples, who was so in the zone that he saw us and started talking to us in Japanese for a solid like 20 seconds before he was like, "Oh wait, I respect the professionalism. When you're centered like that, you just gotta go."
I thought this was fantastic because a lot of Western companies that do have any kind of tour of their plants or their distilleries will focus on sort of a folksier authenticity of sort of a down home. Obviously, I've been on the Jack Daniels tour in Tennessee, very different vibe. But this one actually starts with a video of a bunch of people wearing lab coats who are scientifically engineering the sake. And it was less of a attempt to talk about what was authentic and traditional, although there was some of that. But there was a lot of talk about the preservation methods and the scientific innovation. And that was really cool. And that was actually quite important to Gekkeikan's history.
And since we're running a little long, the last thing I want to talk about is the only other castle I took you to, which is, of course, Nijo Castle. One of the very last things we did in Kyoto, if I remember right. What'd you think of Nijo Castle?
Yes, this is the classic famous castle with the nightingale floors. Although, as we learned, those are mostly created because of a weird quirk of the way wood faceting works. So, probably not a deliberate alarm system, although they are very cool sounding. But this was, I would say, one of the greatest places to specifically have Isaac standing next to you, because the experience that I got at Nijo Castle versus the experience that all the other tourists were getting at Nijo Castle, very different.
Yeah, I noticed this kind of. I hadn't been in a few years, and coming back, there's a lot of curation about the kind of artistry of the decoration of the space, which is amazing. I mean, there's some really cool stuff going on there. But one of the things I find very interesting about Nijo is the way it reflects kind of the political situation it was built for. This was the kind of headquarters of the Tokugawa shogunate in Kyoto, while kind of liaising with the imperial court. So it has to work this very weird political balance of reflecting the power of the shogunate, ostensibly showing kind of deference to the imperial court that it serves, but really reflecting the practical reality that the shogunate runs Japan. And there's some really cool ways that's done. Like the audience chambers have the envoy from the court a little bit higher, but they're not positioned in the traditional way where the envoy of the emperor is sitting on the north end and faces south. Everything's arrayed east west, right? And the entrances are set up in such a way that it's not kind of reflective of the traditional way one enters an audience chamber, which there's some kind of complexity around that. Little touches like that, I think, are very interesting for talking about the kind of politics of how you construct a space like this. they don't really talk about it, I suspect, because after the shogunate falls, the imperial court takes over Nijo Castle. The current version actually was like where the inauguration of the Taisho Emperor was done. So there's a bunch of stuff that's been altered to have more imperial symbolism. And I wonder if maybe there's some kind of lingering politics around we don't really want to talk about the subjugation of the emperor and the way in which this space reflects that because of the fact that I guess the Imperial Household Agency would be the ones who ultimately own this space now.
Yeah, this was definitely, I would say, the most glaring of the times when you were standing next to me talking about all of this fascinating political history. And then all of the plaques were just about the art on the walls. And it was very cool art. I particularly liked the room full of tigers drawn by someone who had never seen a live tiger, but had seen a lot of house cats. So it's a lot of tigers doing house cat things.
That was pretty great, yeah.
Yeah, but again, a belief that what the tourists are going to be interested in is the aesthetics and not the history of the place.
And if Game of Thrones has taught us anything, it's that people love power politics, and if you are curating spaces, you gotta make sure you take some time to talk about that. The people love this kind of stuff. So, one other thing I wanted to mention about Kyoto, because I had kind of expected it to be a little more exciting than it was. I think on our last day in town, I really wanted to visit the Kyoto Gyoen National Park, which we were not staying very far from. This was the Kyoto Imperial Palace, which, I mean, what do you remember of the Kyoto Imperial Palace before I get into it?
I remember spending a long time walking around it, figuring out how to get in, and then realizing that there were only tours scheduled at really weird times that you had to sign up for online before you arrived, and going, I don't want to see it that bad.
Yeah, that's pretty much it. So this is the grounds of what used to be the Ogosho, the like Imperial Palace, the Central Palace complex. And now it's just a city park. It's a very pretty city park, but all that's really left standing is the Imperial Palace and one of the kind of annex palaces nearby, and a few of the outbuildings. You can look over a fence to see the hut where the Meiji Emperor was born.
Yes, I remember you specifically having me take pictures of that hut, and we had a really good conversation about some of the taboos about childbirth in Imperial Japan, which again, very little in the way of curation that would have explained why the Meiji Emperor was born in a nice hut, but still technically a hut.
Yeah, it is interesting how that's not really discussed very heavily. I assume because they imagine that most Japanese people would be familiar with it and most white people just wouldn't know. But the actual palace grounds, there's some interesting curation. There's some markers on, this is the former site of the Konoe Mansion or whatever. But the actual main palace is closed, and as far as I can tell, there's no way to take a tour. They closed it during COVID, and I don't think have reopened it. And yeah, the subsidiary palace, there's this whole rigmarole to get in where you have to sign up online and then show up, and it's only this very tightly timed tour. Honestly, unless you are really into the imperial family for some reason, there are many better things to do in Kyoto. I was disappointed. I kind of wanted to see the palace grounds.
Was that where we had the tea and the traditional mochi at that seasonally open tea house?
That was after this. I was like, screw this. Let's just go to Nijo Castle, which was way better. And if you are looking for castle and other traditional things to see in Kyoto, just go to Nijo Castle. Don't bother with I don't know. If you have a dog, it seems like it'd be a nice place to walk a dog.
Oh, that was where we saw a heron very hopefully stalking a woman with a small dog.
Oh
yeah,
that was pretty funny, actually. There was a heron, which was very kind of poetic, very powerful imagery, but it did really want to eat this very tiny dog, and just was kind of stalking, very visibly stalking it, while the dog was freaking out, not knowing what to do. If you are wondering, as far as I can tell, the dog made it home okay. So don't worry about the dog. It's just a little bit traumatized, but in one piece.
If you'd like to compose a poem about the natural beauty of the heron stalking a very, very scared chihuahua around, though, feel free to do that.
Yeah, man, live your truth. One other place where you might see some herons and possibly also some dogs is the Nishiki Market in the Pontolcho area. If you know Kyoto, this is across the Kamo River from Gion and Yasaka Shrine, the traditional kind of quote-unquote geisha district. And we walked through there one night. It's just a cool little shopping arcade, lots of little restaurants, and you're right on the Kamo River, which has these wonderful footpaths. Demetria got to experience my favorite traditional Kyoto pastime when I was there as a student. That was the one place other than Tokyo where I would vacation a little bit because I love the city. And I would get cheap convenience store whiskey and walk up and down the Kamo River. And you got to experience a little bit of that.
Yeah, a lot of your grad school experiences involve cheap convenience store whiskey. We did, I think, was it in Kyoto we actually found your old hostel?
Yes, also, which is actually by the very last thing I wanted to mention, a little bit south of Gion, which is also cute. It's worth going to, but it's on basically every tourist map. You don't need to. You don't need me to tell you that Gion is very picturesque. Just don't take pictures in the Hanamikoji because that's not allowed, and they'll come. I don't even know, but they'll be very irate with you. But you can take pictures at Rokuhara Mitsuji, which is a temple a little bit to the south. If you're a patron, you've heard my story about staying in a hostel nearby and then wandering through the temple and have one of the lead monks explaining the Buddhist pantheon contained therein entirely using Star Wars metaphors. It was very cool, and the priest in question, he was very excited that I could understand Japanese and just really wanted to tell me about how this guy was just like Darth Vader and this guy was just like Luke Skywalker. It was very sweet. So we did swing by. It was raining, so no one was really about, and I don't think they were doing like the grounds were open, but there were no services. But it's really pretty. You can take some good photos. And there was an elementary school right near there, I think too, where they were practicing for a recital. And were much better than elementary schoolers I've heard in other parts of the world.
I think that was a shrine that had a lot of statues specifically for children who had died, right?
I believe that there are a bunch of Jizo statues, this Buddhist deity associated particularly with like protecting children or protecting children.
Which made the children singing in the distance a little haunting.
That is true. It was also gray and rainy, so it was kind of a creepy day in general. But it did have some real, some slightly verging on eldritch vibes there.
But it was a really, really lovely shrine, and I'm sure if folks had been around, they would have been friendly.
Yes, they. I can vouch for they're very nice folks, and I mean that's the cool thing about Kyoto. Really, like, if you are a history person, which I'm guessing you are, otherwise you're very lost right now, you can just go there and wander around and you'll find something. I mean, there are hundreds, I think, 800 shrines and 1,100 official Buddhist temples within the city limits of Kyoto. That's somewhat come down, I think, from the height, but they're still everywhere. You can just wander around and find all kinds of amazing stuff. And that's what I love about Kyoto.
Yeah, it was a really lovely city, and we did not spend long enough there, in my opinion.
I don't disagree, but how could you miss out on the National Museum of Territory and Sovereignty? Something would have had to get cut, and it's not going to be that. We all know. So that's our whirlwind tour of Japan. Dimitri, do you have any final thoughts for the listeners? Anyone who's interested in going to Japan?
I mean, my number one suggestion would be to take Isaac, but as much as I love Isaac, there's a limit on how many places he can be at once. So this trip actually inspired me to look into some of the features of Google Maps. I've actually created a map of all the places that we just talked about for listeners. And I'm going to look into whether it is possible to curate some of Isaac's episodes so that I can tag them with places and have those available on Google Maps so that if you are planning a trip to Japan, you can pull up some of that history that you might not be getting from the curation of the places you're going to, because we saw some really, really amazing places and I had a really great time. But having Isaac there to tell me about the history of those places really gave it another dimension as a tourist.
And I mean, I actually got my start doing history as a tour guide at a historic site. So I forgot how much I enjoyed doing that. I don't know if you work for a tourist company and you work for a tour company and you run stuff in Japan. I don't know, hit me up. I had a great time. I'd do this again. And hopefully, if you're going for the first time and you don't have much experience in Japan, this episode and the last episode help you think a little bit about what's fun, what's worth doing. But I think the only other thing I would say is I am, as Demetria knows, an inveterate planner. I like to have an itinerary lined up. And Demetria, you really helped me embrace the fact that sometimes you just find cool things. Like, I didn't plan to go to the Sake Museum. I didn't plan to go to Shosein. Those were fantastic. And Japan has a lot of great stuff like that. You can find something cool around every corner. So don't be afraid to just go explore. It's a great place to just see what's out there.
Yeah, we could even have had an equal focus on the history and hit a completely different series of sites in exactly the same places and had a completely different trip experience. I mean, I don't think I can convey enough how absolutely packed and massive and vibrant and dense Tokyo is. You could have an incredible range of experiences in that city alone, even without traveling around the country at all.
And before we end up making another 40-minute episode, we should probably wrap it up here. Thank you all very much for listening. I hope this proved useful for you in terms of potential trips if you're thinking about going. I'm always more than happy to share thoughts on traveling in Japan. And yeah, my last piece of advice is just going overseas can be scary. I know it can be kind of, so you've never done it before. The idea of it can be a little bit intimidating, but it is worth it. I love Japan. It's an amazing place to visit, and I would highly encourage you to check it out. And with that said, this show is a part of the Facing Backward Podcast Network. Demetria, can you tell me about another show that's part of the Facing Backward Podcast Network?
Yes, if you just cannot get enough of Isaac's dulcet tones and you want to hear him talking about weird true crime in history, oh boy, have we got some weird true crime for you. We co-host a podcast called Criminal Records Podcast, which you can find on any podcatcher.
Yes, we've done all kinds of strange crimes in our time together, and they're only going to get stranger. So if you're enjoying our back and forth, please do check it out. And please put some good vibes into the universe for our beloved patrons who support the network at patreon.com/facingbackward and enable us to spend our time rambling about weird crime and talking about cool things that we've done together. Especially thank you to those patrons who've given at our shout-out tier. They are Yan Leonard, Stephen Elkins, Martin Oliveira, Clark Canning, Ian Kellett, Matt Haynes, Jackie Frostocker, Monkey Sack, Alayla McCulloch, Karen Murphy, Peter Wales, Robert Prine, William Arno, Jonas Brandis, Nicholas Kroll, Jerry Spinrad, Jared Stevens, Jeffrey Dwork, Stefan Hrushka, Joshua Kane, Robbie and Kat, Jacob Key, Aaron Finkbeiner, an anonymous Anna's Hummingbird, Mark Sai, Gil, Leslie Ikuta, Trash Taste Enjoyer, Shimao Toshio's History of Japonesia podcast, A House is a Perfectly Cromulent Mascot, The Fish I Catch Are Rhodes Scholars compared to Samuel Alito, Who is a Schmuck, and Everything Changed When the Fire Nation Attacked.